For today's StarCraft history session, I figured it'd be fun to go over some of the team leagues that existed, and of course, most importantly, the offline team leagues that existed during StarCraft's heyday. So I will be going over the GSTL with some mention of Pro League as well, especially after it moved over into StarCraft 2. To do the Brood War Pro League would be a whole video by itself. Let's focus in on GSTL for a little while. GSTL, as you might have guessed, is the GSL Team League, or the Global StarCraft Team League, I think is the official acronym meaning. And it was really the only offline team league that existed due to Korea's size as a country, of course, which has benefited in esports in many ways. But yeah, so you can literally live at the tip of South Korea to the other tip of South Korea, the DMZ, of course, and you would still be able to meet each other rather frequently. So while not every player lived in Seoul, which is where the GSO studios have been, no matter where they've been, it didn't really matter. You could still make it there. So you had the team league that was actually viable and was also very exciting, and also wanted to bring in some of that spirit of Pro League, which was still happening for Brood War at this time in 2011. The GSTL, though, has two very important differences, I suppose. One, obviously, there's not the Pro League teams in GSTL, so they don't have humongous backers like the Pro League teams would have, such as gigantic shipping companies or Samsung or SK2. Now, the GSTL was full of good teams that seemed financially supported at the time, but quickly did not become financially stable and did eventually disappear. I believe every single one of them, yeah, pretty sure have disappeared. The other big difference between the two, besides the fact that one was still in Brood War, one was in StarCraft 2, was that one was all-kill format, another one was a series of 1v1s. Now, the GSTL was the all-kill format. So that meant that if you had the best player in the world on your team, you had a pretty good chance to win because they could theoretically tackle everyone they went up against. Now, other teams might have had snipers specifically designed to take them down, but of course, since both of them the teams can use their full roster, it means that, if your sniper has to come out against their second best player, then they also have their best player in their pocket, you are still screwed. So the GSTL and the all-kill format have definitely been more scrutinized, I think, as far as the quality of play than Pro League. So that was always something that was hurting it. But overall, I would say what really hurt the GSTL was that it just was never taken as seriously as Pro League for many, many different reasons, including the fact that it didn't have, 13 years of history behind it or whatever it was at that point. So anywho, the GSTL was still a very fun thing. You can see the schedule. You can see the teams that are involved. These teams would actually be involved in the GSTL, I guess, close to its end, I suppose. Slayers, IM, Startail, TSL, OGSTL, which was OGS and Team Liquid, Zenex, MVP, Prime, they had weirdest names, FOU, NSH OCO, which I believe is also a combo team. I don't remember that one. FX Open Esports, F United. I do not recognize some of these, to be fair. F United and NSH Socio. Definitely don't remember F United. The other one at least sounds familiar. Very interesting. So anyways, by the way, there was a MVP team and an MVP player and an MVP Gold award. So that's potentially confusing for some people out there. Anywho, you can see that we have very different... Oh, who is that? I'm actually not sure who that is. I know the person on the left is Wolf, but when did they introduce themselves? I got to figure this one out. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Unstable. I don't remember this guy whatsoever. Who is this? Well, this must be before, I guess, Caldor had a consistent job after a mole trap was let go. I do not remember that at all. We are talking about, let's see, 2011 season 1. So maybe only something like 8 months into StarCraft 2's career. So that would be very different, wouldn't it? And then they called their groups Jupiter, Venus, all the planet names. Interesting. Oh, the map pool. Lovely map pool. I love it. It has a lot of maps, though, isn't it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's 9 maps in the map pool. I do not remember that being a factor. But I guess it's a best of... Wait, no. What was it a best... I thought it was a best of 5. But maybe I'm wrong about that as well. But even if it was a best of 7, that's still more maps than you would usually have. That is interesting. I know people have been talking about potentially using more maps in map pools and giving the same amount of vetoes and whatnot. I'm trying to go back to the image of the player because I do want to just note that back in the day, it was the coolest thing to have the Razer StarCraft gear. So they had a keyboard, a mouse, and a headset, and a mouse pad, I assume. But I remember this. I actually bought not the entire collection, but I definitely had the headset for a little while. I don't think I had the keyboard, but it was a long time ago. We have Slayers versus MVP. At the time, I think Slayers was a fan favorite because they came in with Boxer, who was very much a fan favorite, a real legend and celebrity in Korea, of course, making this team. And then they also ended up having some very good players, obviously, MMA being kind of their star player. So Slayers, I would say, was a fan favorite, but do keep in mind, I'm extremely biased. Behind me is actually a Slayers jersey, so there's a lot of bias here. But I don't think I was necessarily unique in being a fan of Slayers, and I think that was because they were one of the more popular teams. They're certainly one of the most well-funded as far as the number of sponsors for a little while, but then Slayers had a very unfortunate bowing out of the StarCraft 2 scene, which would require its own video, so I won't go into it. Initially very popular, seemed to be very well-funded, and seemed to be on the right track as far as developing players and having all-star players as well. So we can see that Crossfire is being played, and we have some fun TVP where somehow a Protoss base gets out in the gold. I guess he literally took a gold base against a Terran in 2011. I didn't realize that was going to be a thing. That seems a little courageous on such short maps. That is something that Alicia did. And because it was a team league, you do have, I would say, a lot more sniper players like I was talking about, but then also snipe builds. So when you're in consistent weekly tournaments back to back to back to back, and honestly, the prestige of either one, of all of them kind of mixed together, you're not really going to have a lot of super unique builds, I suppose, be talked about a lot. I mean, you can definitely see unique builds because in some ways, when all of these online cups start to blur together, you could obviously have people less rigid. They are going to experiment. So there is that point to it. But I would say that when it came to team leagues, you not only had people thinking up these new unique ways to play because they would study one person or 5 people, I guess, in an all-kill team. But, the point is, but you also had all of the eyes on it as well. So I feel like it was a much bigger deal when someone came out with a unique build, and usually you'd have a lot more to talk about, I feel like, as well, because there would be a lot more preparation going into that one particular match, more so than you would in an online tournament, which nowadays most StarCraft tournaments are. Even the GSL has now reduced their finals data, finals and semis, right? So it really is less of the preparation. And as far as preparation-based builds, you do have the all-kill format also kind of taking that down a notch. By far the most snipe builds and the most counter-specific builds were found in Pro League, and that was quite interesting, but I still find it worth noting that it existed in GSTL, and people got really excited when it was clear that a team or a player put a lot of thought and effort into a team league instead of only focusing on their individual tournaments, which nowadays it would be a no-brainer as to what you really practice on, even as like the WTL, for instance, is very exciting for a lot of people. I would say that there's pretty much a no-brainer that Rainer would, or Cyril, or whoever, that popped in my brain, sorry Rainer, would focus a lot on upcoming tournaments, single player 1v1 tournaments, than necessarily doing the WTL if they had to pick and choose. So when 2011 is here, there was a lot of tournaments. There's so many tournaments, and these guys were flying to and from Korea all the time as well. So there's tournaments on top of travel days. And again, if they actually showed a lot of respect to their teammates and to the team league, I think it was quite exciting. And you did have people, of course, come out as better team league players than individual players, but that was never, I feel, as important when it came to StarCraft 2. Again, in Pro League, that might have been very different. In Brood War, to have players who were very good at Pro League was something that they would be proud to say they are. They'd be walking around with that little, the mantle, whatever they're given, being like, yeah, I'm really good at Pro League. I really help my team out. Like, I'm really cool, actually. And people were like, you are cool. That's awesome. But for the GSTL and StarCraft 2 in general, I would say that was just never as big of a deal. Was it a big deal? I suppose, whatever, argue all about much, whatever you want. But was it as big of a deal as Pro League Brood War? I don't think so. I don't think that ever happened. So just kind of TLDR what I just said, basically. GSTL, pretty fun, pretty cool, a little prestigious, never got close to the height of popularity and prestige that Brood War Pro League did, both because of the history of the games that each one was playing, StarCraft 2 with far less history, but also even down to the format type, where people gave more respect to a depth in the team as opposed to having one particular good player who won every single game, which I think still exists today. I think people still like the idea of a well-balanced team over an all-kill format. So another thing that was great about offline team leagues is that you really got to see the entire team work together, which again, frankly, doesn't really happen in today's StarCraft 2 scene. You might hear of players making sure that they prioritize practice with teammates or making sure not to help someone who's not a teammate in an upcoming match. But as far as the camaraderie and the real identity of teams, it frankly is lacking in StarCraft 2 because teams have become less and less a priority, which has also affected the amount of teams and the amount of money that teams put into StarCraft, but that's a whole nother discussion. The point is, back in the day, teams were considered very important. You could easily be a fan of a team and have plenty of those team members to cheer for. If your favorites got knocked out, then maybe you could still say, hey, well, the overall Slayers brand is still involved, so I'm going to cheer for this guy that I don't usually cheer for. That was 100% a thing. I don't think it is really a thing nowadays. Nowadays, despite some very good intentions on some of the team's parts to, have community outreach and so on. And part of the way that that developed was that you would get these offline tournaments and these types of shots where the people were actually, having fun together and they were cheering each other on and they were clearly trying to work as a team to get things done, where you just don't really get to visually see that type of teamwork in modern day StarCraft 2. And it really was a joy to watch because you would soon understand who were better friends and who had more influence over the choices. You think you would be the coach, but actually the head coach wasn't as involved as the assistant coach. And then you could see that sometimes the players wouldn't go to their coaches to ask for advice. They would go to a teammate. And of course, you would also see some team rivalries get set up alongside player rivalries. And they might even do some type of ceremony as well against each other when they have the cameras on them. Because I think everyone can agree that it's easier to be a bit fun and goofy with your friends in this kind of environment than it is one-on-one with a camera staring you down and lights as well on a stage. So it was just a happier time overall, I suppose, back in the old days. But this is really a big contributor to it, all those things I just listed. Apparently, we're actually getting Boxer sent out, by the way, after Alicia lost a PvP, which is pretty cool. And this game will be where he actually plays. Boxer was a fair StarCraft 2 player when he first started playing. I don't think he ever reached the heights that he did back in the early 2000s of Brood War. Certainly, StarCraft 2's popularity didn't really help bolster his popularity much at all. But nonetheless, I was very excited when he was playing. I was very excited that he had a team for as long as he did. Back in the day, it felt like a long time, but now looking back on it, 3 years isn't exactly very long. So seems like some technical difficulties. And we're still watching Slayers be overall, I think, an aggressive team, because Slayers Boxer is an aggressive player, very well known for his micro, and in particular his T-Rexes as well, which have existed in both Brood War and StarCraft 2. So you can see that he is being kind of cheesy in a TVT. But it works really well for particularly team leagues to have someone who's known for being cheesy, and someone who can kind of come in as well as perhaps maybe not the best player on the team, but a player who can either snipe someone, as I was talking about, or just gather information because maybe they reveal a big weakness in this matchup because they almost lose to someone who's not as good. Something like that. And the dynamics are there's just more of them when it comes to a team league, isn't there? So I think everyone kind of misses the team league aspect. The offline team league, again, is really where the heart is at, despite some very solid attempts of doing online team leagues. And I personally do miss the camaraderie shown in the GSTL, but I will take this moment to say that I was a massive fan of Pro League and an okay fan of GSTL, actually. GSTL just never met that prestigious heights that Pro League did. And I was a bigger fan of the 1v1 format, not the all-kill format. And Pro League just had so much more history behind it, not to mention a much bigger crowd, which at the end of the day, that type of stuff does affect your enjoyment when you see other people enjoying it as well. I just want to give a shout out to some of the setup, though, of the GOM TV studio. They've long demolished all these types of sets. The booths were actually never very good. You can ask anyone of any sport, and that it will be the answer. People will be like, why not? Because it's, soundproofing, integrity of the sport. The booths never actually mattered very much, apparently. It just added to an aesthetic that would now be seen as cheesy. I mean, hell, maybe it was cheesy back then too, actually, but I thought it was cool. So anyway, you have the booth, right, set up that they would then move, I believe, out of the way when it came to the 1v1 tournaments. And again, just being able to discuss individual players versus individual players, teams versus teams, all of the dynamics of the players and coaches and assistants and so on. It just made everything feel, well, I'm going to say a lot more alive. It made everything feel like something, there was something attached to, there's something to latch onto. When you only latch onto an individual player, I do think there's a little less, there's less potential basically for enjoying the overall sport, I guess is the best way I'll put that, because I said it, maybe you would lose out on your favorite team member, but then overall you like the team, so you would still have someone to cheer for in a tournament. Now it feels like people have those who they really prefer, and if they get knocked out, that is kind of it. At least, again, that would be my experience, where I used to cheer for every single Slayers team member, but then they disbanded, so then I was reduced down to basically cheering for individual players. So Jaedong, for instance, and then Jaedong would get knocked out in a tournament, and my interest in the tournament would plummet. And I'm someone who eventually, my entire job is based around StarCraft. So that's just one person's opinion, but it did seem to really affect things. So that's it for the Team League aspects. I will be going into Pro League, more of a deep dive of Pro League later on, but do keep in mind that Pro League did eventually come into StarCraft 2. Initially, it was a hybrid situation, which was not very good at all. Apparently, this is the first thing that pops up for Pro League. It's a highlights, but it works, I suppose. But yeah, initially, Pro League had a hybrid league, and it was kind of interesting to see the Brood War players try and take what they knew from Brood War and assign it to StarCraft 2. You also had all of Pro League kind of infrastructure moved over, so as far as broadcast quality, it was also very good. And you had their map makers, I believe, move over, because we had a lot of interesting Brood War-esque maps when Pro League first swapped over to StarCraft 2. So that seemed like a good thing, but then overall, the swapping of Pro League to StarCraft 2 entirely, not a hybrid was a dumb idea anyway, didn't really work out and certainly impacted the popularity of StarCraft as a whole. So in hindsight, it was a very bad idea. I think actually you don't even need hindsight. I think most people agree that the hybrid Pro League was a dumb idea, and StarCraft 2 only Pro League was fine if it wasn't forced. And it was forced. So no one really appreciated that. But you can see we did eventually move over to StarCraft 2, and you see very common StarCraft 2 pro gamer names, even though both players played Brood War. Sue definitely did. And a classic rivalry that was SKT1 versus Green Wings, which I thought was awesome. SKT was my other favorite team. Yeah, well, it definitely could go a lot into Pro League, but just know that Pro League, even after I think it changed over to StarCraft 2 and had a plummet of popularity, I think was still considered more prestigious than GSTL. But GSTL was kind of the homegrown, endearing attempts at the Team League. That's kind of feels like sums up StarCraft 2's position in Korea. It's endearing. It's a good try. Way to go. You tried. So I sound kind of negative actually at the end of the day about GSTL, but I swear I'm not. It just was always in the shadow of such a titan that is Brood War Pro League. So that's the only place I'm coming from. GSTL was a perfectly fine, enjoyable piece of media, but it had a big brother that was constantly overshadowing it. So that kind of discusses the general team leagues, and I will end this video by saying I'm really sad that they don't exist anymore, but it's just so difficult to do in the other countries, right, where you have to take more than a 4-hour train to get tip to tip. So South Korea would be the best bet. And unfortunately, South Korea just isn't very interested in StarCraft 2 as a game. And even Brood War struggles to get a consistent, I guess, team aspect going despite its popularity in Korea. I wish something existed. I do. I think overall teams are better for the ecosystem of a game. And I think teams are totally viable for 1v1 sports and esports if they had team leagues to participate in, which is why the WTL is a great endeavor. So go check that out if you don't know what I'm talking about. WTL, StarCraft 2, Google. It's going to be your best friend. So that's going to be it. Thanks for watching, guys. And I'll talk more about StarCraft history in the very near future. See ya.